The object we chose to present is one of the bronze manillas on display in room 68 of the British Museum, centered around the theme of currency. The manila bracelet we studied is part of a broader collection of other manillas which illustrate the use of currency during the slave trade. Each manila on display has a different history and origin, but the one we focused on was created by members of the Aro ethnic group who once occupied the territory of modern-day Nigeria. The manila is 6 centimeters in length and 6.5 centimeters in width, creating a horseshoe shape with flattened ends at the opening. It is made of bronze and created using the cast technique. Unfortunately, the individual creators and its date of production are unknown. The object was found in the area of Arochukwu by Donald MacAllister during the Anglo-Aro War of 1901-1902 and acquired by the museum in 1920. It has been on display since March 2012. The Anglo-Aro War erupted after years of increasing tensions between the British and the Aro Confederacy. The Confederacy was then defeated, and the British occupied Arochukwu, leading to the eventual expansion into the rest of eastern Nigeria. The Aro Kingdom emerged out of the union of 3 different ethnic groups, Igbo, Ibibio, and Akpa. Beginning in the 1740s, the Aro developed into the region's economic power as they expanded east. Through conquests and alliances, the Aro Confederacy dominated trade along the coast and within the hinterlands. They became the most prominent slave traders in the region, and their merchants served as the middlemen between the kingdom and the Europeans. The Bight of Biafra played a crucial role in the slave trade. The Aro merchants mostly negotiated with British traders who operated within the pre-existing system of commerce developed by Aro political structures. The British held a commercial advantage over other European trading powers because 80% of the British merchants transported goods or metals. In exchange, they exported products like ivory or palm oil. However, their main export from Biafra were the people themselves. The trade in human beings built upon Aro structures and markets that predated European intervention in Africa. As Ugo Nokweji explains, unfree labor had only been merely one aspect of the broader social organization in the Aro Kingdom prior to European involvement. Afterwards, procurement of slaves became the main source of commerce. Slaves were procured in the Aro hinterland through warring and raiding and transported to the coast, where they were sold to European slave traders at various ports.
Looking at imperial intermediaries corresponds to historiographical approaches that argue that the indigenous peoples subjected to European intervention were not, quote, helpless victims of superior forces and institutions, end quote. Indigenous slave traders in the Bight of Biafra dealing with the European merchants were considered imperial intermediaries because they were often subjected to political oversight and regulation by the local states, as explained by historian David Richardson. These intermediaries were buffers in that they were usually from coastal merchant communities that served as the front line of cultural exchange between Africans and Europeans in the slave trade business. Their strategic positions between African suppliers and European buyers allowed them to accumulate wealth, making money off the trust system in which Europeans advanced goods to African merchants on credit for slaves. However, as British historian Robin Herman explains, this often led to the African middlemen owing credit to European enterprises who lowered the value price of local goods or currency so as to force African traders to sell more in order to compensate for what they initially borrowed.
The Manila currency allows us to explore the role played by slave traders in the Bight of Biafra as imperial intermediaries between African kingdoms and European traders. In the Aro communities, indigenous intermediaries controlled slave procurement in the hinterlands. As the Aro allied with the neighboring communities and formed the Aro Confederacy, methods of slave trading were more closely associated with imperial structures. Along the Delta, most slave trading was conducted by wealthy trading families known as the canoe houses. In the 20th century, the British administrations adopted a policy to demonetize the Manila currency in order to replace it with a British one. This signifies that currency is much more than a simple standard of value with monetary function, but also a symbol of cultural and economic dominance. It was part of the policy of converting the indigenous economies of southern Nigeria into an appendage of the British economy. In other parts of the world, products with strong ties to the local economy and global trading networks were often used as currencies. Cacao beans were one of the most prominent forms of currencies in the Aztec world, while in the Chinese Ming Dynasty, silver started to replace paper currencies due to the trans-Pacific silver trade that flowed from South America and Japan into China.
In the 19th century, as the slave trade gradually wound down after abolition of the slave trade by the British government, so did the indigenous production of manillas. However, their role as currency in colonial trade continued. By the end of the 19th century, they were mainly used in other less vicious but highly exploitative forms of colonial trade, such as palm oil. Today, manillas serve as memorials to what was once equated to a human life, symbolizing both the complexities and the inhumanity of the Atlantic slave trade.